All right, it's 8 o'clock. So good evening in Singapore. Good morning in America. I'm Ang Peng Hwa, a professor at NTU, WKWSCI School of Communication and Information. Delighted to host this webinar. We have as our special guest Adam Clayton Powell III. I first met Adam back now in 1997, Adam, and I remember the situation totally clearly. Yes, still. I had just given this plenary in Internet Society in front of this audience that was in a basketball court. And then at the end of the talk, Adam came up to me and waited a while and came up to me and like, who's this guy? Came up to me, and then he invited me to visit his office in Washington D.C. It was I think I'm not sure, the Freedom Forum, right. And then he offered to give me a tour of the facility there, and then they were going to build this thing. Yes, they're going to have a visit this Freedom Forum. And then when I turned up, he says, "I'm sorry, I can't show you around because I'm going off on this groundbreaking ceremony for the museum in DC, right?" And finally, when I had a chance to visit him in DC and the museum was up, he had left the museum. So I'm kind of missing chasing you all around. But I've since been in touch with Adam now and then, and kind of followed him around, and I guess he's followed me also. He's gone to USC, and Adam is one person who has managed somehow over the years to reinvent himself in new areas, in strategically important areas. And his topics are really, your big, bold projects. I know in America they call it hairy, but in Asia we're quite hairless, so hairy isn't a big deal for us, right? But you're looking at big hairy goals, and you somehow manage to be there all the time. So his latest big hairy goal is on election cybersecurity, and I had a conversation with him before I invited him on, and he said that, well, actually he meant it for just like a couple of states. But when he spoke to the deans in engineering and others, the president of the university, USC as well, said, you should get bigger. You should go to all the states. And so when he approached the state officials, everybody signed up. So I thought, wow, this is fantastic. We should, definitely hear what you have to say and things that they're doing. So Adam has managed to somehow, come up with really fresh ideas and important ideas as well. And if you ever Google Adam, remember he's a third person, right? Not a first or second. And he's got really famous, forebears, right? One is congressman, and then a preacher as well. And I guess I'll leave you to look him up. So Adam, I'm really delighted that we can meet this way. Whenever Adam comes to Singapore, we'll try and meet up. But unfortunately, because of the COVID, here we are separated by distance, connected through the internet. I want to also now have a word from the sponsors. The centers backing this. There's Gerard Goggin, WKWSCI professor at the school, and he just announced that he was appointed formally director of the Asian Communication Research Center just yesterday. That's how hot this news is, and you are among the first people to get this hot news. So Gerard is come to us from Australia, Sydney, run the school there before, and absolutely delighted to have him here with us here in the school. And then it's also Professor Edson Tendok. He is the director of the Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, the InCube, and they are the two centers that are supporting this webinar. So I'm going to leave Adam to speak, and then after that, the Q&A following. So Adam, I invite you to begin your presentation. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Peng Hwa. It's always good to see you again, and always good to be in Singapore, even virtually. Indeed, it's I am surprised that you remember the exact circumstance of our meeting. I was just trying to think of it myself, but I knew it was more than 20 years. So the research into communications and the internet and how things have changed, that's really been quite a rapid time of change and innovation. And I'd love to be able to take credit for having landed in what is a high priority topic here in the United States and in democracies all over the world. But there's a saying that sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be smart. And in this case, I was fortunate to have some friends who steered us in the right direction in this, and so we were quite prepared when the demand came. I have some slides which give some sense of how all of this started and where we've wound up, which could be useful. So let me. I need to share my screen at this point, so if you make me a co-host. There we go. And let me go to full screen. So this is our initiative, the USC Election Cybersecurity Initiative. I'm the executive director, and we began actually back in 2015. We used to have a series of quarterly meetings in the USC Washington office, pictured here, and we would, in each meeting, bring together people from government, industry, and research to try to solve a particular problem. Sometimes it was outdated mobile phone regulations, which in the United States were written in the 1980s during the Ronald Reagan administration, and many of them had not been changed. And so we had the chief economists from the Federal Communications Commission, an FCC commissioner, and others, and they all agreed this needed to be changed. We were able to actually make some progress. Well, this was another meeting that we were having, talking about the internet and security. And the gentleman on the left with his hands up is Vint Cerf, who is one of the co-inventors of the internet back in the 1960s, one of the best informed and most intelligent people about the internet. And the topic of this meeting was securing internet access for mobile phones. And after a time, Vint looked up and he said, "Why are we talking about mobile phones?" And I said, "Well, that's the purpose of this particular meeting." And he said, "Well, you can buy a coffee maker now with an IP address. You can buy a refrigerator from LG that will connect you to the internet. Don't you really want to secure everything connected to the internet?" And everyone around the table began to nod. And he said, "Okay, no more mobile phones. We're talking about the Internet of Things and securing everything connected to the internet." On October 31st of 2015, I was in Shanghai at a USC conference, and USC's president was speaking, and he saw me in the reception area, and he said, "What's happening with this cybersecurity thing I'm hearing about?" And I said, "Well, we're focusing now on Internet of Things, and Google actually has designated USC as one of 4 US universities to work on this. The others were Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, and Illinois Urbana." And the president, Max Nikias, looked at me and he said, "You're thinking too narrowly." And I said, "What do you mean?" My appointments at USC been in both engineering and communications. And he said, No. He said, "Engineering, yes, get the dean of the School of Engineering, Dean Yorsos, to formally agree to be part of your project. The dean of the Annenberg School at the time was Ernest Wilson, get Dean Wilson to agree. You should also get the dean of the School of Public Policy and the dean of the Business School." And I sort of looked at the president. I said, "You want me to report to 4 deans?" And he said, "No, 5. Let the law school know what you're doing." Well, fortunately, I knew them all fairly well, and within 24 hours, I actually had them all in formal agreement that their schools would be part of our initiative. Fast forward now to 2017, and the National Governors Association, the governors of all 50 states in the United States and additional territories, they requested that USC become their research partner for cybersecurity. And so in 2017, there was a formal announcement at the National Governors Association annual meeting in Washington, D.C. And at the time, pretty much at the top of the list of most state governments was securing the records of driver's licenses to make certain that they would remain private and not become public. Well, if you look at the date, 2017, you realize that's just after our 2016 election, and election cybersecurity had been very much in the news because of the email hack against the Democratic National Committee. And so very quickly, the security of American elections became the #1 priority for us. The head of the National Governors Association, who was there second from left in the picture, came to USC in California together with his head of security, who's in the center in the picture. And the gentleman to the left in the picture is Jeffrey Cowan, former dean of the USC Annenberg School, former CEO of Sunnylands, where he hosted meetings with summit meetings of President Obama and the leaders from China, Jordan, and other countries. And he's our principal investigator. And then to the extreme right in the picture was the person from the USC Business School, who was part of our team. We received some assistance from the Democracy Fund, a foundation in Washington, D.C., to start to do election cybersecurity training for state officials. In the United States, elections are not really national. We have on the order of 10,000 local elections around the country every 4 years. And under the US Constitution, these elections are held by the 50 states and the District of Columbia. And so the states have a critical role in tabulating these local elections and then in selecting members of the Electoral College, who then proceed to elect the President of the United States. So the National Governors Association had a competition, and the first round of winners was 6 states. And so we began working those states off the record. These are closed door meetings because we were discussing security measures, many of which could not be discussed in public. The first one was in Virginia, in the state capital in Richmond. And you see state officials here around the table. We met for an entire day. Interestingly enough, in addition to officials from the state election board and local state county officials from around the state of Virginia, there was also someone there from the state transportation department. I was asking, why is there someone here from the transportation department? They said, oh, because we don't want to have road crews working in front of election locations. That would restrict people's access. And also you don't want road crews working anywhere near an election location on election day, because accidentally they could cut fiber optic lines or power lines, which would affect election access. The second state where we conducted workshops was in Minnesota, the state capital in St. Paul. The person speaking, well, first, the person in the middle was the governor. He actually came and attended the workshop himself. The person to the right who's speaking was Matt Masterson, who was the point person in the 2020 election in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for election cybersecurity. Very, very knowledgeable and wonderful speaker. And so he's last year he was very much the rock star of election cybersecurity in the United States. My project manager and I were at a National Governors Association summer meeting in 2019 in Utah, and we introduced ourselves to some people in the hallway, as you do at these conferences, and some of them were from Google. And I said, "Oh, thank you very much. You've given us some support over the last few years to look at cybersecurity." And after a 20-minute discussion, we basically had an agreement at their request to conduct cybersecurity training in every one of the 50 United States. And my reaction first was, "Oh my goodness, that's a huge project. You're talking about a multi-million-dollar budget." And the woman who I was talking with sort of said, "Yes, we know." And I said, "I don't know if we have time to get this through your Google hierarchy and through USC." And she said, "It's in my budget already." At which point I said, "Did I give you a card?" So we quickly reached agreement, and we moved ahead with plans to conduct workshops in each of the 50 United States over the course of the election year. We met with a number of people, including security experts in the computer science area, in the political science area, in communications, in public policy, in law. And two of the people with whom we met actually had run presidential campaigns in the United States. Bob Shrum, who ran the John Kerry campaign in 2004 and other Democratic campaigns around the country, Senate and gubernatorial campaigns, and Mike Murphy, who ran the Jeb Bush campaign in 2016 and many other Republican campaigns around the country. They're both now at USC as co-directors of a center on American politics. And so I met with them and I said, "We're doing exactly what you two have done. We're running a 50-state campaign, but without a candidate." And Bob Shrum leaned forward and he said, "Adam, you're wrong." And I said, No, we are nonpartisan, we are independent. And he said, No, your candidate is democracy." I thought, whoa, that's powerful. I'm going to steal that slogan with credit. And so that's been our slogan ever since, because what we are facing in all democracies around the world is threats to democracy itself. Everyone also said that we should not try to do too many things in our workshops. I thought we could do 9 or 10 or 11 things. They said, no. Select 3 things and do them well and share best practices. The 50 United States are, they are each, the saying is, they're each the laboratories of democracy. Each state does things slightly differently. So as we traveled around the country, and as far as we know, we were the only ones working with all 50 states, with the exception of the federal government, the intelligence agencies, Homeland Security, so on. And in the course of going around the country, we learned a great deal from what the states were doing. And so we decided to focus on 3 areas: basic cybersecurity, led by USC's Viterbi School of Engineering; disinformation and misinformation, led by USC's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism; and crisis communication, which we since retitled Crisis Response, led by USC's Center on Public Relations. We had our final pre-launch meeting in January of 2020, and there again is Vint Cerf in the center of the picture, who was very much our advisor. He's very busy. He's a vice president at Google, but he has attended every one of our planning meetings and has been an incredible source of guidance and advice. And you're thinking we get most of our money from Google. Google has funded us to some extent for some years, but Vint and everybody else at Google says, you have to be independent. You have to be platform and vendor agnostic. Don't favor Google. Don't favor Google speakers. Don't favor Google software or hardware. Cover everybody's strengths and weaknesses. And the gentleman to his left, our right, in that picture is Cliff Newman, who actually was the lead person, is our lead person in cybersecurity presentations. Our first workshop at the end of January was in Maryland, in a cybersecurity center not far from the Center for the National Security Agency. And so we had a significant participation from NSA, as well as from the state of Maryland and from universities, plural, in Maryland, our first university partner. We had university partners all over the country, in almost all over the 50 states. And our first university partner was the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, whose students had just won the national championship for cybersecurity. So from their president on down, they have been active. In fact, their president opened our program, our first workshop this year in 2021. Our next workshop was in the state capital of Ohio in Columbus, under the Capitol Dome. It was a particularly convenient place, obviously, for state officials to come, right in the middle of their state capital. We had a very good session there. And we were fortunate enough to have, there's Matt Masterson, the rock star of election cybersecurity. He actually presented our opening session on cybersecurity and cyber safety, and as you can see here, social engineering. Then we did a workshop in Los Angeles at USC for officials from Southern California. And this is Cliff Newman, who is, as I said, our lead person on cyber safety and cybersecurity. Our next workshop was in Kentucky, in the state capital there. And this is the football stadium. We were supposed to do it in the student center of the University of Kentucky, and instead they had double booked it, and so they moved us to the football stadium. Fortunately, not outside where it was freezing cold, but just inside to the right in the clubhouse where the VIPs watch the university football games. Here on the right is the director of Kentucky's election system, and on the left is a faculty member from our university and university partner in Kentucky, the University of Kentucky. Our next workshop was at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And again, we had participants. In this case, we were somewhat surprised because elected officials wanted to come, members of the state legislature. And so we were quite pleased, and they shared some particular examples, some particularly dramatic examples of how they had been hacked in their campaigns. And here we have the director of Nevada's elections presenting part of the program. Then in March, we moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to our partner there, the University of Pennsylvania, and to the other Annenberg Center, and they hosted us for our workshop there, attended by election officials, by academics, by media. We have media partners also across the country in almost every state. So we have media there. Unlike our 2019 workshops, these were open to the press, open to the public. And so we obviously could not discuss classified information, but we could discuss general practices that, that campaigns and elections should be following. The person on the left in this photograph, this again is from our Philadelphia workshop, he was the chief technology officer of the Biden presidential campaign, and he was describing how the Biden campaign was repeatedly attacked by cyber attacks from different directions, different sources, different countries. The person on the right is an intelligence analyst for CNN who was questioning him. She has since joined the Biden administration, and I believe she's in the National Security Council now. We had quite a response around the country, and this was in Columbus, Ohio, doing a morning television program discussing our work. Here's another television program that I did. Local television and local newspapers around the country. Everybody knew this was important, and the idea that there was actually a national campaign offering free election cybersecurity training, independent and nonpartisan, was something which got a great deal of attention. So March 10th, we were all in Atlanta, Georgia, preparing to do our Georgia workshop. And on March 10th, USC, the pandemic had begun, and USC canceled all travel and all in-person meetings. So on March 11th, we flew back from Georgia. On March 12th, we closed the Washington, D.C. USC office and began to meet virtually. And the question was, how do we reconstitute our program so that people around people in the 50 states can participate, but not in person? And we quickly embraced Zoom as the way to do it. March 31st was our first online workshop returning to the state of Georgia. And what we discovered using Zoom is that we could get much higher profile speakers, people who could never have come in person. Our online workshop in Georgia was opened by the Attorney General. And the second speaker was the head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which showed that the Attorney General was a Republican, the NAACP leader was a Democrat, and that really set the pattern. We even had the leaders of both political parties sit next to each other virtually on panels and work together to promote election cybersecurity. So we had done 6 in-state workshops in person from January to March, and then from April to October, we did 45 virtual workshops, 51 total, one for each of the 50 states except California, which we did twice. Instead of hundreds of people we expected to reach, we reached over 3,500, actually close to 4,000 people in total across the country, people in campaigns and elections, but also people at universities and media. We had hundreds of VIP speakers and panelists, members of the US Senate, governors, secretaries of state. In fact, in half of our workshops, that state's Secretary of State, the person in charge of elections, was the person who opened the workshop, and election directors. But again, because of Zoom and because it was virtual, we had people who were speaking who could never have joined us in person. My favorite, perhaps, was Senator Mitt Romney, who opened our Utah workshop, and he opened it using his mobile phone, using the video from his mobile phone as he was in a hallway at the U.S. Senate. Another person who opened, a Secretary of State, I probably shouldn't say which state, he asked me, Mr. Powell, do I have to stay for the entire workshop? And I said, oh, no, Secretary, as soon as you finish your opening remarks, you should leave. And he said, oh, thank you very much, because I'm actually at a funeral right now, and I need to get back inside. So, as I said, we reached, we had speakers who we could never hope to have in person. On October 28th, at the end of our 50-state tour, we had a lesson learned program, again with Vint Cerf, Matt Masterson from Homeland Security, the president of the National Association of Secretaries of States, and 15 other political guests. USC's president opened the program. We had the deans of different USC schools who were panelists and presenters. And it was a 3-hour program. And I think everyone was surprised at how popular it was. Our agenda, as I said, throughout the country was cyber safety and cybersecurity, disinformation and misinformation, and crisis communication. We also, when we did the workshops in person, we would have handouts that everybody could take away. Well, you do them virtually, and we have to show links to these handouts and other resources. So this was a one-pager from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and I said, anybody who's about to announce for public office in the United States, download this and do it. It's 8 simple things you can do, because what we were told over and over again is the moment you announce for public office in the United States, that's when the cyber attacks begin. But in addition, because we were all working virtually and not in secure facilities, Homeland Security, the National Security Agency, and CISA issued another one-pager, additional one-pager, securing your cyber infrastructure. And again, very simple, 4 things to do, 4 things not to do, one-pager. And I said, everybody should download this and implement it. We also pointed to resources from other organizations, including this one is Defending Digital Campaigns, and it offered free assistance for campaigns for candidates who are campaigning for the U.S. Congress, for the Senate, and for the House of Representatives. As I said, Cliff Newman was the head of our cyber safety and cybersecurity team. He presented in most of the states. This year, he's going to present in all of our workshops. He actually is in charge of the computer cybersecurity program at USC. And if you use enterprise login, you probably are using software that he invented. As I said, we were at our vendor and platform agnostic, and so we promote the protection offered by other companies other than Google, our primary sponsor. So here's Facebook Protect. We of course did not say we would not cover Google. So here's Google's advanced protection program, not just for politicians, but as you can see, for journalists, business executives, and others. This is something which Google only did last year during the campaign, and only for campaigns that were verified. They had to verify that you were a legitimate campaign, and then they would offer you this enhanced security program. Microsoft Defending Democracy, which will continue again this year. So those are the kinds of things that we would show. For disinformation and misinformation, we have Sarah Mojirod, who now is in the USC Viterbi School of Engineering. Last year, she had a joint appointment also with USC's Keck School of Medicine, because much of what her work in disinformation is supported by the US National Institute of Health, focusing on disinformation with the pandemic and disinformation about vaccines. And so she presents about disinformation in politics and elections. And here is her agenda. It's pretty straightforward. And this is something which people, I think, found surprising, that these are data from the Pew Research Center asking Americans how concerned they are about made-up news, disinformation and misinformation influencing the 2020 election. And you look at these data, and it's almost identical, Republicans and Democrats, because we so often think of this in the United States as a partisan issue. It turns out to be much less partisan than we thought. And certainly traveling around the country, we found that once we got away from New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and San Francisco, that there was much more bipartisan support, Republicans and Democrats working together to secure elections. And again, for resources, we would, when we were doing the workshops in person, we saw people taking out their cell phones and taking pictures of our slides. So doing them virtually, we invited them. Okay, take out your phones and take pictures of these slides. They're also on our website, but you can take a picture of them and download them. More resources for disinformation. More resources for disinformation, and again, to get information from us, we put up our email address that people could email for further information and more details. And for crisis communication last year, the person who did most of our presentations was Tom Lang, who had just retired as the head of public relations for Union Pacific Railroad, the largest private railroad in the United States. And he is a specialist in crisis communication. He had also worked on the BP oil rig spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And so he would say, here's what you should do before the bad thing happens to you. Just make certain that you're organized, because you're going to have to do this sooner or later. Better to do it before the bad thing happens than when you're in the middle of a crisis. And item number 10 here is something which the American Department of Homeland Security urges over and over again, that you really should have a simulation of the bad thing happening to you, whether it's a cyber attack or something else, so that you've actually rehearsed how to respond to it. So that was what we did last year, and we're going to be doing a version of it this year. But this year we had a surprise. We had in our first workshop, this is a picture of Gary Pruitt. He is the president of the Associated Press, which is our national media partner. And I invited Gary to open our first workshop for 2021, and it was on March 25th, last week. So he prepared a 1-minute welcoming everybody, but it was so startling that I asked him, I said, Gary, can you stay with us a few minutes? He's in his office there in the Associated Press, actually in his office in Lower Manhattan. I said, because what you've told us is something which we haven't really heard before, that there were thousands of sophisticated cyber attacks on the American election on election night. I said, can you describe that to us? And I actually, I can play, we recorded the video of his remarks. I can play that in a few minutes, but it is really quite something, because what we're finding out now, including Gary's remarks last week, an Associated Press story this week, a report from the US intelligence community this month, is that there were far more attacks on the American election than we knew at the time. Let me stop there. There's my email address. And if we have time, I think we have a few minutes. Yes, we have a few minutes. Let me play Gary's remarks. Let me go to here. Let me go to my full view.
You will need to close, Adam, you need to close PowerPoint and then reselect the share screen. I know it's a bit of a pain here, but that's the way Zoom works, yeah.
There we go, thank you. And now let me pull up Gary's message, which I will launch and go full screen.
When I get into audio, is there, I know, I think you need to go to Zoom and select the audio as coming from the computer or something, instead of the mic, I think.
Let me get out of this. Well, I can summarize his remarks. I've sent you the link so you can share it with everyone. What he said is that this was far more sophisticated than in 2016, that it was the attacks on the Associated Press in particular were withering, is his word. And we think that one of the strengths in terms of cybersecurity of American elections is that they are so decentralized, that you have 10,000, on the order of 10,000 local elections around the country, so that if you were trying to change the result, you would have to actually attack many different places. Even at the state level, you have to attack a number of states to try to change the result. Instead, what the attacks have done, and I'll use the term which the Department of Homeland Security uses in the US, which is, what's the return on investment for a bad actor? To try to change the election result takes a huge effort. Instead, if you're just trying to cast doubt on democracy, well, this can be done much more easily and much more cheaply. And so what Russia, China, Iran, other countries, Gary Pruitt said that the Associated Press was also attacked from Pakistan. What other countries are doing is they're trying to shake the confidence in the democratic process, in elections and in democracy. So why attack the Associated Press? Gary said that in 2016, he was notified by the then Secretary of Homeland Security, a cabinet member, that the Associated Press had been identified as a particular point of weakness in the US election system. And Gary said, that's not something you want to hear. And so working closely with the federal government and with cybersecurity experts, they secured the AP election reporting system in 2016. And Gary was on the phone throughout the 2016 election night with the Secretary of Homeland Security to make certain that everything was up and running. Why is this so important? It's because if the Associated Press computer system goes down on election night, the thousands of clients, newspapers, television stations, internet, radio stations, thousands of clients in other countries would be without a source of information about the US election. The only source for election returns in the United States on election night is the Associated Press. People vote in the states. The states collect the information, but the states don't report certified results that day. They report 2-3 days later, maybe a week later. And so the notion that on election night that people around the world would not have any returns from the United States, including Americans turning on their computers and television sets, would have no election returns, that would really shake confidence in the electoral system. So 2020, what happens? Even more sophisticated, more damaging attacks come in. Gary Pruitt said that the attacks continued, thousands of attacks on the Associated Press to try to take down the AP. Most, he said, came from inside the Russian Federation. He said we can't tell whether it was the Russian government or some other entity or entities, but they were coming from inside the Russian Federation. Others came from Pakistan. We know that according to the US intelligence reports this month, China decided not to attack the American election. Why? Because they didn't think that either President Trump or President-elect Biden would be particularly friendly to China. And so it really wasn't worth their trouble. Iran, we believe, according to American intelligence reports, tried to intervene, favoring Joseph Biden, because they believed in Iran that Biden would be more favorable to Iran. And Russia definitely seemed to be intervening in favor of Donald Trump, because they believe that Biden would be more critical than Trump. So that is what the context is now. We are saying to everyone that they have to be as secure as last year and more so. We've been invited by other organizations. For example, on March 18th, a week before our workshop, we were invited by the National Conference of State Legislatures to conduct a webinar on election cybersecurity for members of the state legislatures around the country and for their staffs and for election directors around the country. So this work is going to continue. We have scheduled a total of 10 regional workshops. Because everything, the pandemic is still restricting travel, they will be virtual for now. So we'll do 10 workshops of 5 states each. In addition, we will do some for other entities. We will be monitoring carefully how the attacks are changing. The bad actors, particularly in Russia, have R&D budgets and are putting resources and people into this. We're watching how they attack the elections this year in Ukraine, Kosovo, and in other countries, because those give us clues to how the American election is going to be attacked. Well, this is an off-off year in the United States, what we call an off-off year. Only 2 states have statewide elections, New Jersey and Virginia, but there are elections for mayor around the country, And then next year, the entire U.S. House of Representatives is up for re-election, 1/3 of the Senate, and a large number of governors. So we're directing our efforts to reach campaign and election officials to make certain that not only are they as prepared as last year, but they need to be even more prepared, because the attacks are going to be just as strong, if not stronger, and more sophisticated. So let me stop there, Peng Hwa, and invite questions.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Adam. Adam, I have to apologize. I really didn't formally introduce you properly. So let me, somewhat belatedly now, I was so excited to tell them about our meeting. So let me formally introduce you. So Adam is an award-winning journalist. It's won awards, one that I have here, and the other, but the one I have here is from The Economist magazine. In 1999, the World Technology Award for Media and Journalism. He's also been a reporter and producer and news director of a radio news channel. And so if you listen to him and you want him to continue, like you want to keep listening to him, it's because he was a real journalist. I mean, you hear that in the voice, like a certain cadence to being a real journalist that I obviously do not have. Adam has also been Vice President of News at National Public Radio, Executive Producer at Quincy Jones Entertainment, and then at the University of Southern California, he was Vice Provost for Globalization, opening new facilities in Shanghai and Seoul. And then he's held other positions, and then the current one is Director of the Washington Programs on Communication Leadership, and in this particular initiative on election cybersecurity. So if you have questions, please feel free to either raise hands or to type them in the Q&A. I would have a couple of questions on top of my head, Adam. You spoke briefly about them. You had mentioned that the news about these attacks would be coming out. That this is the news that you're referring to, that the AP, the Y service was under attack during the time of the elections. Was this news that you're referring to?
We knew that there were some attacks that were taking place. In fact, the head of the Senate Campaign Committee for the Democratic Party told us that the day that somebody announces for major public office in the United States, that day the cyber attacks begin. So it's important to have your defenses up. What we did not know until this month, or was not public until this month, was the intensity and the number and the sophistication of the attacks in November on the U.S. election. As far as we know, they didn't get through. They didn't get through to the AP. As far as we know, they didn't get through. A number of states were attacked. No one was able to. Correction. There were a couple of intrusions, but as far as we could tell, no vote totals were changed. The election director of Kentucky had a wonderful term, a wonderful image. He said, "We kept seeing them trying the doorknob, but they couldn't get in. They couldn't get the door open." And so that's really the headline, is that the U.S. election survived the various attacks that were planned.
I guess my big question here would be, to what extent did this project help to contribute to the greater robustness in security in the U.S. election?
We're very careful not to try to either overpromise or overclaim credit. We know that we reached, as I said, thousands of officials. We worked with, we worked in tandem with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, which were working with state election officials in particular. And so we were working with people in campaigns who did not have, for the most part, access to those kinds of federal government resources. We know that from our surveys after each workshop, we know that more than 80%, sometimes close to 90% of the workshop participants self-reported that they had changed their security measures after our workshop. And some of them were quite simple. In fact, when we were first discussing this, again, with people like Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy, who've run presidential campaigns, they said, don't approach this as if you're talking to people who are computer scientists or IT professionals. You're talking to people who are running political campaigns. These are very busy people. Some of them are going to be very junior. They may be interns, they may be university students. And so you have to start with the basics. Have a strong password. And I thought, oh, that sounds much too elementary. Said, no, start with the basics. Have a strong password, two-factor or multi-factor authentication, use a VPN. And to our surprise, in the post-workshop surveys, we found people saying, yes, I changed my password. Yes, I'm now using multi-factor authentication. So we know we changed the behavior of most, well, I shouldn't say most, of those who self-reported at the end of the workshops. We know we changed behavior on the part of many people. That certainly would have made it more difficult for attacks to succeed. So we like to think we had a part in making the American election stronger, but again, we're careful not to claim too much credit.
Okay, I just have one more question, and then I'll pass the microphone to Gerard and to Edson. And that is that in the news that we're reading, there are claims that the electoral fraud, widespread electoral fraud. Why haven't you step forward and say, well, no, we did all these things, and this is a bipartisan effort. Both parties were represented in our training, and we see the attacks, but we think that nothing has happened. Why didn't you come up to say something like that to sort of calm down, lower the temperature a little bit?
Well, we tend not to get into the fraud area. What we do though is we will cite data from, for example, the Brennan Center at New York University has tried to come up with an estimate of how much election fraud there was. It's hard to have 150 million people voting in an election without any fraud. And they've come up with a pretty small number. And the same thing with the number of people who vote twice. We know it happens, but it's a pretty small number. Kim Wyman, the Secretary of State of the state of Washington, this is one of her big issues. She's a Democrat, and she's upset that prosecutors around the country in the United States do not prosecute people who vote twice as a rule. And she thinks that's a bad idea, but nevertheless, we think that's a pretty small number. The problem for confidence in elections is that in the United States, we've had several very, very close elections. Close because it's not a popular vote. And Joseph Biden won the popular vote by millions. It's a vote state by state, and then each state votes in our electoral college. And so you can have a situation where in 2016, out of the more than 100 million votes cast, if 77,000 votes had gone the other way, Donald Trump would have been defeated. In 2020, last year, if 50,000 votes out of 150 million cast had gone the other way, Joseph Biden would have been defeated and Donald Trump would have won. So with elections this close, both political parties tend to be upset. I mean, in 2000, 2004, and 2016, Republicans won very, very close elections, and Democrats were upset. 2020, a Democrat won a very close election. Republicans are upset. As one person who actually follows election security around the world, they said the best hope for a secure and confident election result is one that's not close. If you have an election that's 5, 7, 10 percentage points between the winner and the loser, that's a good result. But when it's 50-50, it opens the door to too many questions of doubt.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm going to pass the microphone to Gerard. Yeah, Gerard.
Yeah, thank you, Peng Hwa. Thank you, Adam, so much. Just a fascinating presentation, and obviously just super interesting globally as well. So I suppose I wanted to just follow up a bit to just get a bit of a sense from you. I mean, obviously, as well as the importance of this work in the US context, and which has been widely watched across the world for the range of reasons that have been sort of more recent interests and so on. But more generally, I mean, having large tech companies headquartered and being engaged in your project is great to see, right? So I just wondered from, say, from an international perspective, what are the lessons that might, be applied more generally to, say, the Asian region, for instance, a very diverse region? And I suppose, secondly, I mean, what's your sense of the state of play of international cooperation, which presumably is really key about this? I mean, two very big questions, but it'd be intriguing to get some thoughts from you on this.
This is an area which we certainly were not well aware, certainly back in 2015 or 2016, of the level of international work on this. There is an entity in the United States, IFES, International Foundation for Election Security, ifes.org, and they send observers to elections all over the world, Indonesia, India, and you think, well, they get some of their support from the U.S. government as a bipartisan entity, and somebody there told me, and we partner with them. They've helped us with a great deal of information. They've actually presented in our workshops, presenting lessons learned from other countries, saying here's how the election was attacked in the Ukraine. Here's which was mostly from Russia. Here is how it was attacked in Indonesia, where actually most of the attacks didn't come from Russia. And so things for which you have to prepare. And I thought, well, I said, well, this is actually wonderful work that you're doing, going around the world, working with quietly. They don't want to be in the forefront. It's not an American election, it's the Indonesian election. Sure. And we're just there to provide whatever technical assistance the Indonesians might want. And my friend said, well, actually, this is in our enlightened self-interest. We're actually seeing how others are attacked to learn how we're going to be attacked. And the same thing in the other direction. It couldn't happen this year because of the last year because of the pandemic, but there was a plan to bring observers from all over the world, from other democracies all over the world, to come to Washington, D.C. and meet, first to observe the American election, and then to meet in person in a ballroom across the river in Arlington, Virginia, to compare American election security with election security from around the world. And at the meeting in 2016, which took place, which I wish we'd attended, but we didn't know about it in time. Many of the observers from other countries said, "This is how you do it?" They were not entirely impressed, and part of it is that it's difficult for people in most other countries to understand quite how decentralized the United States elections are. We vote in different ways in different states and even in different counties. And then last year during the pandemic, we had to change the election dates for primaries, the election places people could vote, and the methods that people could use to vote. And that is really the we hope the most extreme stress test that we're going to see in this country, and many other countries are observing, saying, okay, how is this going to hold up when you are not holding an election in a pandemic? Although actually in last year, one of the countries that we studied quite carefully was Liberia, because they held an election during the Ebola pandemic. Right. And so we are all watching each other for lessons learned, and we're getting a sense of, in particular, through some formal framework. I guess the most formal framework, the most active formal framework is a so-called Five Eyes of U.S., Canada, U.K., Australia. Who am I leaving out? New Zealand, I guess. There's a much more formal work, and in fact, one person who's active in senior level in the U.S. Cybersecurity area, he said, well, if you're really serious about this, you really have to go to London and talk to the British, because they're ahead of us in some ways. And we really need to pay more attention to what they're doing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Edson, if any questions? Yeah.
Yep. And before I turn over, before we start getting questions from our attendees, but I guess they can start writing now if they have any questions in the Q&A box, or if they raise their hands, we can call on them after I ask my question. So I have a question, Adam. The in a way a dominant discourse in the 2016 elections is how fake news to some extent swayed some people. Right, and if you compare, say, disinformation, which would be what my question is going to be about, cyber attacks might be invisible to the public, but the threat of disinformation is quite, visible, right? It's more visible. What is your group's group's assessment in terms of the impact of fake news in the 2020 elections compared with the 2016 elections?
There's Donald Trump probably is the person who has popularized in the U.S. the term fake news. But what we saw in 2020 was the use of fake news as a disinformation tool by other countries interfering in the U.S. election. What we began to see over the course of 2020 was that Russia would hire US and UK citizens, journalists, to write for them. The journalists didn't realize they were writing for a Russian entity, but they would create under a false name something that looked like a journalistic organization, a news site. And one American journalist said, I became suspicious when the stories I was writing would be posted, and my editor would have made some rather curious changes. And then we realized, we did some research and realized that actually we were writing for a Russian-owned website. And something else which Russia did, I'll get to where I think your question is going in a minute, but something else that we found Russia doing was they would do something which here at Homeland Security they call franchising. They would hire an American citizen who did not realize that he or she was being hired by someone in Russia to post fake stories on the American citizen's website. And these fake stories were carefully designed for maximum appeal, to be picked up and to be repeated through Twitter and other social media. By involving American citizens and Russia also using a false identity, hired resources, websites in the United States. By operating inside the United States, that meant under US law, our top cybersecurity experts in the National Security Agency, in Cyber Command, in the US Army, they by law were prohibited from investigating American citizens. So there was a lower level of scrutiny of these operations inside the United States. This is something which, as you can imagine, is getting quite a bit of attention in US Congress, trying to devise a way of carving out in US law a way for the top security agencies to be able to go after foreign agents of foreign influence in the United States. It's a tricky area because we don't want to in any way endanger press freedom or freedom of speech, but it's something which clearly was the case. To get to where I think your question was going, which is a lot of disinformation and misinformation that did not come from Russia or China or Iran. We've had disinformation, which is deliberate falsification, or misinformation, which is the accidental repeating of the information which you don't realize is false. We've had that in American elections as long as we've had elections. People always make charges. I mean, as Peng Hwa said, I used to run National Public Radio News here in the United States, and there was one election where two of my best reporters came in and said, we have an authoritative source, who of course wants to remain anonymous, who says that a candidate for national office is a felon, has committed a felony. I said, well, if that's the case, I hope you can find a second source and find where the felony happened. If there must be a record in the judicial system or in the prosecutor's office. And they said, no, we have this this authoritative source who must remain anonymous. And I refused to put that on the air. I said, it may be true, but you haven't convinced me. But that kind of thing, in fact, the president of CBS News once stopped me in the hallway and said, you know, they give out awards for stories that are put on the air that are groundbreaking. And he said, someday they may give awards for people who keep false stories off the air, and you should get one. But now with social media, one of the disadvantages of the democratization of media is that anybody can post any rumor on Twitter, on their Facebook account, and it's out there in public. And suddenly, it's the news media, CNN, New York Times, whatever. They see this and they react in ways that they might not have if it had just been somebody calling their newsroom or calling one of their reporters. And so we have much more unverified charges and unverified information that's out there in public. And this is clearly having an influence. I mean, yesterday there was a wonderful presentation by a friend of mine at MIT, Adam Berinsky, who's a specialist in this area, and he said that false information is believed by more people than correct information, and trying to correct the false information is very, very difficult. We, in our workshops, that we tell political campaigns and election workers is, if you are hit with false information about your campaign or about your election, you have to do what one of our presenters calls a truth sandwich. You have to tell the truth then say, here's what's false, it's not true, and then you have to tell the truth again. Otherwise, you're repeating the false information. So it's very, very troublesome. One thing which is not a solution is what has started to happen in the US and other countries, where political leaders ask the social networks, Facebook and Twitter, to remove information. And that puts Facebook and Twitter in the business of being judges of journalism. So yeah, some information obviously untrue, but other information, classic example is going to be the removal of the front page story by the New York Post, the oldest newspaper in the United States, of a story about President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, being under investigation for some of his dealings with Chinese entities. Enough people thought that turned out to be true. In fact, it turns out the federal prosecutors in the state of Delaware are conducting an active investigation. But because in October people thought it might not be true, that report was removed. And the New York Post's website actually was blocked because people thought it wasn't true. So, and as you can imagine, authoritarian countries have embraced this technique where anything that is dissent is labeled disinformation and therefore is censored. Again, it's a difficult area which we're going to be, everybody in different countries will be working through this for months and probably years to come.
So just a quick follow-up, Adam. So I was interested to hear from you that disinformation and misinformation were part of cybersecurity. How do they factor in? Because I had the impression that cybersecurity was really about security.
We included it, again, we were told to select 3 areas, 3 subjects for each workshop's focus. And disinformation kept coming up over and over again. So that the major, the thing that on which we spend the most time is cyber safety and cybersecurity, securing your equipment, securing your telephones, your laptops, your networks. The thing on which we spend the second most time is disinformation and misinformation, just because the campaigns and election directors around the countries kept saying, this is something we need to know how to combat. So yes, it's different, and the techniques for combating it are very different from securing an electronic network. But it was of sufficient, it was identified as being of sufficient importance that we should use that as a second topic. And if anything, it became more important as the election year went on.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Other comments or questions, Gerard or Essen? No? Okay.
Yeah, for me, I have another question, which is, do you think, or is there already a program administered by your group that then also targets journalists, considering how, just like with the AP's case, right? And I think in other cases where they might be targeted with a wave of disinformation, either being labeled as fake news or being fed with false information. Are there efforts to also train journalists in the US?
This is becoming something which is of getting more and more attention. As I said, it became more important as the campaign year last year went on, and it takes every time you think you know exactly what's happening, some new variation pops up. I'll give you one example. There was this is misinformation. It wasn't disinformation, but potentially quite harmful. There was an NGO, a nonprofit, engaged in voter education in the United States, and they bought billboards by highways saying, the election date has been changed, here is the new election date. And they had the election date wrong. So thousands of people are driving down these highways, looking at these billboards, and the election day was wrong. And they quickly, once the error was noticed, they changed it. But just think of the confusion. We were actually on the phone. Project director and I were on the phone with senior officials in one of the U.S. states, including the Secretary of State, including somebody from the National Guard, including, as I said, some senior people. And they were in the process, while we were on the phone, of changing the election law in that state because of the pandemic, to change the election day of the primary election, not the November election, the primary election, and to change how people could vote so that there could be more voting by mail, so you didn't have to show up in person, and to change the places where people could vote if you did go in person. Well, if you're changing the dates, the places, and the methods of voting, sometimes just days before the first election, the primary election, the opportunity for confusion under the best of circumstances is there. And what quickly became obvious to journalists and everyone else is that the opportunity for bad actors to come in and to create confusion was greatly increased by the pandemic. And so journalists around the country formed special voter education units. We actually at USC, we started a national voter education project with the National Association of Secretaries of State and other organizations, because there was enough disinformation and misinformation out there that it became imperative to get the correct information to voters. The classic bit of disinformation in the U.S. is if you are a Democrat, you vote on Wednesday, and if you are a Republican, you vote on Thursday. Well, no, only one day was right. So and that's sort of like almost like the joke in political circles. But last year, election days were changing, and where and how you voted was changing. And so to get the correct information out took a determined, explicit effort on the part of journalists and others.
Okay, Adam. Okay, thank you. We don't seem to have other questions, so I think we're going to end the session here. I want to say, Adam, that it's always inspiring to hear you talk about the projects, and I think my colleagues definitely are inspired. I mean, they managed to get a big picture and bring people together. I mean, they talk about academics, like you said, herding cats, and you managed to herd like 5 deans, right? I mean, that's really amazing. That's a feat in itself, right? This recording will be made available to others who are interested, and I'm sure that our colleagues from the strategic studies will be interested. Unfortunately, there's a clash in the timing of this, but they told me that they'll be interested to attend and to hear your talk. So on a note, I want to thank you again, and we all are looking forward to you coming back to Singapore. Your tickets are booked for January already, right? You said that.
Yeah, I have my reservation already, hoping the pandemic has lifted.
Okay, so let me know, and then we'll book the Chinese restaurant, and I got one with great food. I mean, where else, right? So and we'll come, right? Okay. So on a note, I'm going to end this now. Adam, thank you again. Wonderful. We will be in touch, I'm sure, talk about your work and your project as well. Okay, so best wishes, yeah. Okay.
Thanks.